Sometimes the cost of faith is written in blood, carved into childhood, and remembered in scars that never fully heal. There are lots of things news stations won't tell you, but what I'm about to share with you today is one worth telling by every media house. This is a testimony unlike any you have seen or heard. This is a testimony of blood and sweat, of faith and suffering, of salvation, persecution and deliverance, but make no doubt it is a story of my survival and persecution, of the trials I went through, but trials indeed that worked out for my goose. I really hope that God will speak to someone's heart through this story of mine, leading to conviction, strength and assurance of faith that you are not alone. Please, before we continue, brothers and sisters, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Whether you're in Lagos, London, Los Angeles, or anywhere else in this world, let's connect as one family in Christ. We need each other's prayers now more than ever. Together, we stand stronger. I was born in 1973 in Aleppo, Syria. My father was Palestinian, born in Haifa, and my mother was Syrian. After the wars changed everything, my father became involved in activities that put him at odds with the government. He operated from Damascus for a time, moving between cities, always looking over his shoulder. It was in Aleppo that he met my mother at a community gathering. They married quickly, and within months, he disappeared. My mother told me he left 2 weeks before I was born because staying would have meant death for all of us. My mother worked as a seamstress during the day and cleaned offices at night. I was 7 when I realized other children had different lives. They had fathers who came home. They had meals at tables. They had bedtimes and stories and someone to check if they finished their homework. I had the streets. I had other boys like me, wandering between market stalls, sleeping on cardboard when it got too late to go home, eating whatever we could find or earn. The streets taught me things school never could. I learned which merchants would give you yesterday's bread and which ones would hit you with a broom. I learned which alleys were safe and which ones belonged to older boys who took whatever you had. I learned how to become invisible when men with guns walked by, and how to run when invisibility wasn't enough. I was 9 when I first heard about Jesus. Not the Jesus mentioned briefly in our religious lessons, but a different understanding of him. A man named Khalil ran a small shop that repaired shoes, and he would let street kids like me sit inside when the weather was bad. He never preached. He just worked and hummed songs I didn't recognize, and sometimes he would share his lunch with whoever was there. One afternoon, I asked him why he was kind when no one else was. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to carry both sadness and light, and he told me it was because someone named Jesus had been kind to him first. He explained that Jesus loved people nobody else loved, that he died for people who didn't deserve it, and that he offered a home to people who had none. Those words planted something in my heart that would grow slowly, like a seed in rocky soil. By the time I was 11, I had started visiting Khalil more often, not just for shelter but because I wanted to understand this Jesus he spoke about. He gave me a small book, portions of the New Testament translated into Arabic, and told me to hide it carefully. He warned me that some people wouldn't understand, that my choice to read it could bring trouble I wasn't ready for. But I was hungry for something beyond survival, something that made sense of the emptiness that followed me everywhere. I read at night by streetlights, tucked into corners where no one noticed, a skinny kid with a book. The words confused me at first, but certain passages struck deep. I read about Jesus touching lepers when everyone else avoided them. I read about him eating with people society rejected. I read about him dying not with curses but with forgiveness. And something inside me broke open and began to heal at the same time. When I was 12, I made a decision that would reshape everything. I told Khalil I wanted to follow Jesus, that I believed he was who he claimed to be. Khalil didn't celebrate. Instead, his face grew serious, and he told me to count the cost carefully. He explained that in our world, this decision could mean losing whatever little I had, that it could mean danger I couldn't imagine yet. But I had already decided. I had nothing to lose that mattered compared to what I'd found. Khalil prayed with me that evening in his small shop, his hand on my shoulder, his voice quiet but firm. He told me I was now part of a family bigger than blood, that I belonged to something that would outlast every government and every war. I felt something shift inside me, like a door opening in a room I'd lived in all my life without knowing it was locked. For a few months, nothing changed outwardly. I still wandered the streets. My mother still worked herself to exhaustion. But inside, I was different. I started praying the way Khalil taught me. I started seeing people differently, not as threats or resources, but as souls Jesus died for. I even started sharing food when I had extra, something I never would have done before. The trouble began because I couldn't keep quiet. I told another street kid about Jesus, a boy named Rashid who sometimes shared his sleeping spot with me. Rashid seemed interested at first, asking questions, wanting to know more. But Rashid had an older brother who was involved with a militant group, and when Rashid mentioned what I'd been saying, everything unraveled. 3 men came looking for me on a Thursday afternoon. I was near the market when someone grabbed my arm and shoved me into an alley. They weren't police. They were from the neighborhood, men who saw themselves as protectors of faith and tradition. They told me that spreading lies about their religion, deceiving young people, and abandoning the faith of my fathers was a crime punishable by death. They beat me that day behind stacked crates where no one could see. Fists struck my face until my vision blurred. Kicks landed on my ribs and back until I couldn't breathe without pain. One man held my arm while another twisted my fingers backward, asking me to renounce what I'd said about Jesus, to admit I'd been foolish and misled. I couldn't speak through the blood in my mouth, but I shook my head. That refusal cost me 2 broken fingers and a kick that cracked something in my chest. They told me this was a warning, that next time they wouldn't be merciful, that they knew where my mother worked, and that my betrayal could cost her everything too. Then they left me there, bleeding and broken, unable to move for hours. Khalil found me that night. Someone had seen me being dragged away and told him. He carried me to his home, cleaned my wounds with hands that shook, and wept as he worked. He told me he should have protected me better, that he should have known they would come. But I told him through swollen lips that I didn't regret my choice, that even the pain couldn't erase what I'd found in Jesus. The next weeks were torture of a different kind. My body healed slowly, but the fear was constant. I couldn't return to my usual places. The men had spread word that I was an apostate, someone who had abandoned Islam for Christianity, and in our community, that label was a death sentence waiting to happen. Other street kids avoided me. Merchants who once tolerated me now chased me away. I became more invisible than ever, but now it was isolation rather than safety. My mother discovered what happened when she saw my injuries. She didn't understand at first, thought I'd been in a fight over stolen food. When I finally told her the truth, that I believed in Jesus, that I'd become a Christian, that this was why I'd been beaten, her face went through every emotion at once. Fear, anger, confusion, grief. She told me I was going to get us both killed, that I had no right to make this choice for her, that my father's troubles had already destroyed enough of our lives. She begged me to recant, to tell anyone who asked that I'd been confused, that I'd made a mistake. But I couldn't lie about the only true thing I'd ever found. That night, she cried in a way I'd never heard before, a sound of something breaking that couldn't be repaired. 2 months after the first beating, they came again. This time, there were 5 of them, and they came at night. They dragged me from the doorway where I'd been sleeping, covering my mouth so I couldn't scream. They took me to an abandoned building outside the city, a place where screams wouldn't matter. What they did that night went beyond beating. They wanted to erase my faith through pain, to prove that Jesus wouldn't save me, that my belief was worth nothing against their certainty. They used electrical wires, burning my skin in places I still can't look at without remembering. They held my head under water until my lungs screamed, pulling me up only to ask if I still believed, then pushing me under again when I nodded. They broke my left arm with a metal rod, the bone snapping with a sound I still hear in nightmares. One man kept asking me where Jesus was now, why he wasn't rescuing me, what kind of God would let a child suffer this way. Through the agony, I remembered Jesus on the cross, asking why God had forsaken him. I realized I was sharing in something sacred, something that connected me to Christ in a way comfort never could. That realization gave me a strange peace even as my body was being destroyed. They finally left me there, believing I would die before anyone found me. But Khalil had been searching. He had contacts, people who whispered warnings and information, and he arrived with 2 other believers before dawn. They carried me to a doctor who asked no questions, who worked in silence to set bones and stitch wounds and inject medicines I couldn't name. I survived, but I was changed. My body carries scars that map that night like a geography of faith. My left arm never healed straight. I still have nightmares where I'm drowning and burning simultaneously. But I also have something they couldn't take, a certainty that Jesus is real, that he walked with me through that darkness, that choosing him was worth everything it cost. Khalil eventually helped me and my mother escape to Turkey, then to a place where being a Christian doesn't mean death. My mother never converted, but she tells people her son was willing to die for what he believed, and there's something like pride in her voice when she says it. I'm older now, but I'll never forget being that 12-year-old boy who chose Jesus knowing it would cost him everything. And I'd choose him again, through every beating, through every scar, through every moment of pain. Because he chose me first, when I was just a street kid with nothing, and made me part of a kingdom that torture can't touch. If you've heard this story today, I want to ask you to pray for believers around the world who face persecution for following Jesus. Pray for their protection, their strength, and their witness. Pray that their suffering would produce fruit that lasts for eternity. If you're reading this and you've never surrendered your life to Jesus, today can be your day. Pray with me. Jesus, I know I'm a sinner who needs saving. I believe you died on the cross for my sins and rose again. I surrender my life to you today. Make me new. Give me courage to follow you no matter the cost. Amen. Please share this story, comment where you're watching from, like this video, and subscribe so more people can hear testimonies that challenge us to count the cost and choose Jesus anyway.